Intentionally slow playing with clear intent to win on time, stream sniping, and human manipulation are all unsportsman conduct and unacceptable in tournament competition. Violations are subject to disqualification, prize revoked, and pass down and/or additional punishments. This is so incredibly vague and potentially malicious for the community. The reason that I don't like this is because while in client, I think Dave Tron was saying like, oh yeah, like report them through the client system, and then we get like some in-game data on the back end that we can look at to like try and dole out punishments. But then like Mo said, you're probably not getting a punishment in real time. So am I supposed to just like accept my L because I got slow played when my opponent might get DQ'd and then like go play my next round of Swiss? Because there's no way in client to monitor this. You're incentivizing witch hunts on Twitter, where it's like, oh, my opponent like played really fast in game 3 after they slow played game 1 and 2, and it's like it's possible that your opponent just like, you know, took their time and thought about games 1 and 2, and then game 3 they looked up and said, oh shit, there's 5 minutes left on the clock, I gotta book it, because they're not going to play at the same pace that they did in games 1 and 2, because now there's 5 minutes left on the clock and it looks really weird, and all of a sudden like then the person that they beat is going to like go on Twitter with screenshots and be like, oh man, my opponent took like, 20 minutes and it was Mo, and we got to get him out of here, ban him from the tournament. And the big problem with that is not just that like witch hunting is bad and we shouldn't be doing it, but also that if you are looking for a quicker response from Riot, you are incentivized to post that on social media, because that's just the world we live in, right? If you have a problem, you tag the company 100 times on Twitter, and generally you're going to get a response quicker than if you didn't do that. So I'm really worried that witch hunts are not only the best way to abuse the system, but also will get you a quicker response if you actually are someone who got cheated by someone who is slow playing. I think that the timer system just sucks. I think that you need to have, like, in order to define slow play in client, the fair amount of time, like, I should always be allowed to take the maximum amount of time, and that should not be considered slow play. What should be considered slow play is going beyond the maximum amount of time, so make it so that slow play is impossible by reducing my timer to what you consider a fair amount of time. In physical card games, when I was a judge, the way that we always kind of looked at it, and humans are allowed to be, like, a lot more subjective on this stuff, right, is we would give you about 45 seconds per action. Every 45 seconds, you had to play a card or like use an ability or something along those lines. If you didn't do it in 45 seconds, then we would tell you, hurry up and do something. Like, make a play in the next 10 seconds, or I am giving you a slow play warning. And it was like 2 to 3 slow play warnings for a game. I don't remember the actual penalties. I didn't have to give them out that much. I have an intimidating presence. Hey, Donut. But in digital formats, you can't really do that. You can't just say, oh yeah, 45 seconds per action, because that's an insane amount of time for how many cards you're playing in LOR, especially. Like, I have not, like, I thought that my, what do you call it? The little sidebar, the history of the game thing. I thought that was going to break in one of my matchups, because it was like Jack Seraphine versus Karma Set, and we played something like 30 cards in one turn. You can't give me 45 seconds in between each of those. What it kind of comes down to is I liked the direction that they headed earlier, right? Where they were like, yeah, we're going to give you like this certain amount of time at the beginning, and then the less time you use now, the more time you're going to have later. The problem is that I feel like they still give you like way too much time in the later, but also like playing burst speed spells probably doesn't expend the timer as much as it should. We've seen a lot of like high level matches come down to just someone didn't click something fast enough. And I think one of the big questions is like, if I give you 75 seconds versus 90 seconds, how much impactful decision making are you making in that last 15 seconds? Timer's too short in some cases where you have a hard decision. Would be nice to have a bank where you can think for like 120 seconds, one per best three. I agree with that. I think that once per match, like, you should be able to tank, right? I think the most amount of time we ever gave for an action in physical card games was we would give you 3 minutes if you had to search your opponent's deck. Especially because, like, we had one card that was like, just take any permanent in your opponent's deck and put it into play. I don't know what's in my opponent's deck. I gotta look through this shit. I gotta look at the board. I gotta figure out what the action is here. I think because the board states in digital card games don't get as out of hand as they do in something like Magic the Gathering or Force of Will, where like there wasn't a limit on the number of permanents you could have on the battlefield. You should not have 45 seconds to take turn one. I don't think you have quite that amount, but I think we really need to cut down on like some of the minor actions in the game. And one of the things I would like to see, And I don't know how doable this is, probably not very. But one of the things that you get out of subjectivity of human judges is if you have no fucking cards in hand, I'm not giving you any time to make plays. Anything you do other than pass is slow playing if there are no actions you can take. Runeterra doesn't recognize when there are no actions you can take. I could have no cards in hand and it's just like, yeah, buddy, man, you know what? You can take 2 minutes to sit here and stare at the pretty board, click on your little pet and all that kind of stuff. I would like to see a system implemented where, like, the less resources you have, the less time. Like, I want time to scale with how many resources you have available. If you have 10 cards in hand, that's more difficult than if you have 2. In most cases. Obviously, there are going to be some hedge cases where, like, you have 2 cards in hand and, like, you got to think real hard about which one of these is the right one to play. I don't know how easy it is to... Well, I know it's probably not very easy to implement something like that into a digital card game, but that feels like the sort of solution, right? I feel like physical card games have a massive advantage on slow play over digital card games. And even though it's been like 10, I had to look at the year, it's been like 10 years since Hearthstone came out and kind of made these mainstream, we still haven't really figured it out. And I don't think it's something that has been pushed, really. I don't think turn timers have been pushed in the way that they do in physical card games. Like, Hearthstone was easy, right? They slap a 90-second timer on it and say, that's it, that's your whole fucking turn. I don't care how many cards you have to play. Everyone keeps saying chess clock, and I do like the idea at the very least of giving you the timer bank for the entire best of 3, not per game, because I think a lot of the issues that people have does just come down to getting slow played in game 3 or game 2 after, you know, your opponent won game 1 or whatever. And, like, when I am playing a competitive game, and even if I'm, like, advocating for someone who's playing a competitive game, I don't want them to have to think about anything outside of the game. I don't want them to have to think about the timer. I don't want that to be their main concern. I want them to just focus on the game they are playing and trying to win that. That said, the one thing that I'm really not big on here is intentionally slow playing with the clear intent to win on time. If winning on time is a win condition, like if you have the ability to win on time, it's insane to not allow me to try for that in certain scenarios. Right? Like, if I... What am I trying to say here? I think Drissoth mentioned it on Twitter, where it's like, you know, if I play lightning fast, or like if I play really slow in games 1 and 2, and then like I play lightning fast in game 3 because I have to, like, is that a clear intent to win on time? If I'm fighting for board rather than going for the kill in game 3, like, is that clear intent to win on time? Because I've done this before. It was the World Championship that I won. I was playing the top 4, and when there were we didn't have untimed top 8s in Force of Will, which my top 4 opponent let everybody know about after the match ended. But essentially what happened was, with 7 minutes left on the clock, I realized that I should probably be playing for time rather than life totals, or rather than, like, you know, going for an actual win. So at 7 minutes left on the clock, I started expending all of my resources to preserve my life total as much as possible, play for the win on the clock, because I knew that, like, neither of us were very likely to kill each other in 7 minutes if we just played the game out normally. And so I went for stall tactics. I, you know, maybe added like 3 or 4 seconds in between every pass because I was passing pretty fast, and I was playing at a reasonable pace still, which is slow for me. I tend to play very quickly, so when I slow it down to a reasonable pace, then, you know, it does look a little bit more like slow playing, which it is, but it's not like slow playing. It's just playing slower than I normally do because, like, there's 7 minutes on the clock and I'm trying to be a world champion, right? And when it came down to it, the clock ended. My opponent had like 8 creatures on board. I had nothing on board and no hand, and I was up 2,000 life. So I win. I win the match, and I move on to the finals of the World Championship. And my opponent has the gall to look me in the eye and be like, how do you want to play this? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, I had you dead to rights. And I was like, yeah, but I won. Right? This was a teammate of mine. It was a whole thing at the time. It was a lot of drama. But he genuinely believed that the right thing for me to do was scoop because I used the timer to win. Whereas I saw it as like, you know, we started game 3 with not a lot of time left. The most optimal thing to do is play for the clock at that point. And I don't want to see people punished for playing to a win condition. If you are going to allow people to win on time, then you have to allow them to play to win on time. And I'm worried that if you try to automate the system, then you are going to catch people in those scenarios and get them banned. But if you don't automate the system, then you're going to get a lot of witch hunts. And it's up to Riot to find the healthy middle ground. I could sit here and give you the answers, but I don't think they're easy to code, and they might end up breaking 16 other things, so I don't know how helpful that would actually be. I think it's pretty obvious, like, what they need to do, and it's possible that they just went for, like, ambiguous and shorthand wording in something like this. But I mean, we even saw it in what was it, the APAC Worlds qualifiers, where those of you that were there for that stream remember it was like 1 a.m. and I was up casting. I think it was Reroll versus Chenia, and Reroll just roped every single action so that he could try to blitz out a win in game 3 with like, I think everybody in chat was theorizing that like this was a punish for Vayne lineup specifically or something, and it was like it worked, or it almost worked. I don't think he actually won there. He did end up winning later, and like he didn't slow play his next opponent who didn't have a Vayne in the lineup, and like if there are win conditions available, I think you should be allowed to take creative approaches towards them. Like if you know that your opponent is running this lineup that, you know, can't necessarily win game 3 very quickly, and I can probably outboard them, or like this is the level of testing that I've gotten down into, then like, yeah, you should be allowed to play for something like that. The problem is how much time you are giving them to sit through games 1 and 2 in that situation, I feel. So that's kind of what I want to see looked at a little bit more, is just like you have entirely too much time to take actions in Legends of Runeterra. And then on the flip side, it feels like yeah, like it's cringe, but if there's, you know, if we're at the World Championship and there's $40,000 on the line, I don't give a shit if it's cringe. I'm trying to win $40,000 fucking dollars. And I'm sure there are a lot of people with that mentality. And so we shouldn't allow them to do that, right? And we even saw it with I think it was Sonicolic a while ago, was talking about how like he started roping in grassroots tournaments to try and like get the system changed, and people were like really dogging him for this. And it was like, that is how you get these things changed, is you abuse the system and say, look at how broken this is, Riot, please do something about it, instead of everybody like gentlemen's agreeing to ignore it. Because if you gentlemen's agree to ignore it, then it's not going to come up until you have these high pressure, high stakes situations, and then all of a sudden it's a real feels bad. Just have one 22-30 personal timer for all 3 games instead of 3 separate 7:31s for each one, where literally the first 2 don't matter. I do think it's absolutely wild that the timer does not transfer in between games. And I think, like, don't make rounds last longer, just make game 1, game 2 personal time usage. So do in Riot tournaments. Dude, in Riot tournaments, not grassroots. The only thing I disliked about Sonic doing it was its community tourneys always go overtime anyways. Yeah, it probably didn't pick the best platform, but I think that Riot tournaments happen so few and far in between that, like, unless Sonic was doing it consistently, which he would have to do it in grassroots tournaments to do, then no one's even going to notice that he's doing it. Right? You kind of have to do it in grassroots, otherwise no one's going to take notice. That's the whole thing about, like, protests, right? Is, like, they are designed to be inconvenient. They are to show you that, like, hey, this thing is broken. I am inconveniencing you to show you, like, how often I am inconvenienced by that. That's sort of, like, the nature of a protest, right? So, like, yeah, it sucks for all of his opponents in grassroots tournaments, but, like, that was the place to do it, because if you do it once every season, you're doing it, like, 4 times a year.